Hey fellow stock cardians, it's Hoda, co-founder and CEO of Stock Card. Today I thought I'd turn on my camera and talk to you about ETF cards. Some of you know we've been working on ETF cards for a long time, and finally last week we have a major update to how ETF cards look and work on a stock card. So I'm super excited to show you how you can use ETF cards in your research, and hopefully I can get some of your feedback in the comments or by pinging us on the live chat on our website or just emailing us at admin@stockcard.io. So let's get started. I want to show you how you use a Stock Cards ETF product in your investment research and how you make sure the ETFs you're investing are the good ETFs. So let's use something like ARK. ARK Invest, one of my favorite ETFs out there. Their flagship product, RKK or ARK Innovation, is one of the most popular ETFs among a lot of stock cardians. So we're going to use that. Type RKK in the search bar like you do for any other stocks on a stock card platform. And we're going to land on ETF card. And so welcome, this is the ETF card. Super excited to show you how it works. You may notice there's some major improvements compared to how stock cards look. First of all, a lot of you told us about you want to be able to navigate through stock cards much more easier than just clicking on layers as the stock cards are presented to you in a layer format. So we added this navigation panel on the left-hand side of ETF cards. And the way navigation panels work is that anything that you're interested, you can click and it directly takes you to that section. So for example, maybe you didn't know what ARK Innovation ETF ticker RKK is all about. You could click on Introduction and it scrolls down to Introduction to the Fund. It tells you what it's all about and it gives you some of the basic information that you might not want to know about that company, about that ETF. So number of holdings, 14, what kind of objective the fund manager, in this case Kathy, would be, and so on and so forth. Of course, like before, you could still click anywhere on a stock card and it would take you to the right section. For example, if you wanted to know about sentiment, as of now, about RKK or ARK Innovation ETF, you of course can click on the sentiment itself and it takes you to the sentiment section of the ETF card. And just like a stock cards, we have the last layer, all the information you want automatically pulled into the ETF card, and it gets refreshed every night, by the way, if you know, and you can get all the information you want. So in the case of sentiment, tracking money flow, simple moving average, RSI, relative strength index, and we even added 25-day Arun oscillator. So these are just work the same as how stock cards work, but we also made it a little bit easier. You could just navigate it through this left-hand side navigation panel. And then we moved, a lot of you are familiar with who's following, who's watching, who owns it, who sold it, that kind of information about an ETF, about a stock. We did exactly the same thing about ETFs. So you could see how many people are following it, how many people watching, owning, and sold it in their portfolio. And of course, this is a new product, so we don't have many people yet using it, but hopefully in the next couple of months, you're going to get a significant number of fellow stock cardians using the ETF cards. And then you will see get a good sense of how many people own it and what is the status of that stock or that ETF. Of course, just like stock cards, you could enter your own strategy. For example, I really love ARK for buy and hold. So I submit my strategy as a buy and hold, and looks like it's 50-50 between me and other folks, other stock guardians. Some own it for buy and hold and some own it for speculation. Of course, like before, we tell you which theme this ETF belongs to. We just brought it from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, and you can get similar ETFs to ARK. So RKK is an ETF that is focused on technology and has more mid-cap and small cap type of companies in the fund. So that's why you see a lot of the similar funds are more focused on technology, mid-cap, small cap type of funds. For example, Vanguard S&P Mid-Cap 400 Growth ETF is a very good competitive or similar ETF to ARK's KK. All right, now that you kind of got a sense of the general look of ETF cards, let's just talk about how do you really use an ETF card in your research. And this is one of my most favorite section of this demo that I'm sharing with you, because my team and I, specifically our head of product innovation and product ops, Shama, has spent so much time talking to you guys, to you girls, to you folks, and researching online and gathering information and doing sort of a R&D to figuring out what are the information you'd want to know when it comes to an ARK, when it comes to an ETF. So let me show you what we came up with. We ask ourselves, and we ask you, what questions do you want to get answered when you want to invest in an ETF? We all want to know whether the ETF is expensive. Is it going to charge us a lot of money, or is it going to charge us not a big fee? We want to know what is the impact on taxes as well, because ETFs can be tax friendly or tax unfriendly. So that's my number one box that we brought onto an ETF card. It's about the cost associated to that ETF. So ARK's Innovation Fund, or ETF, it's a low cost fund for two reasons. One, because it has a reasonable fee. It's an actively managed fund that only charges 0.75%. So it's not one of those crazy funds that charges 1%, 1.5%, 2%. It's not one of those. So it's a good, reasonable price. And maybe even more importantly, the tax impact that it has on your holdings, it's quite small. So the year to date, there hasn't been any tax cost for ARK, and in 1 year, in 5 years, the tax implication that it has for that ETF, it's much smaller than normal, or many other comparable ETFs. So that's why it is a reasonably or very, very low cost considering all the advantages it provides too. Then the second thing is whether the risk you're taking with this ETF is reasonable, because when you go and invest in an ETF, you probably want to reduce some of your risk instead of going and buying an individual stock, right? So that's why we need to make sure the ETF that you're investing in has reasonable risk. When it comes to ARK in this case, it has some performance risk. It's a high risk fund because it's extremely volatile. It's drawdown, or it's basically fall in value. It's much more higher than something like S&P 500. And as you know, we always compare things that we invest into S&P 500, because buying S&P is one of the easiest things you could do and sit on your hands and just buy S&P, and that's the perfectly normal and good strategy. So that's why we always compare things to S&P, because if you want to do a little bit more and not just sit on your hands and research and pick your stocks and ETFs, you want to know whether this is beating the S&P or not, or how you're deviating from S&P's performance. So in this case, there is drawdown, so there is a volatility. For ARK, there is turnover, because ARK sells its holding and buys them quite rapidly. There's tracking error, there is beta, and there's some historical good Sharpe ratio. So even if you don't know some of these information or some of these financial metrics about that ETF, we bring all of that for you, and then we give you these easy color coding schemes, as you all familiar with, in order for you to understand what is that ETF all about. So when it comes to ARK, we share with you the performance risk is high, and there's something that's called qualitative risk. It's basically the decisions that a fund manager make as it relates to using leverage, the style that they have, the expenses they charge you, and many other considerations. And we put all that together and say whether the company, the fund has the risk, qualitative risk that associated with the management's or the fund manager's style. So that's risk. And the two other important ones obviously is whether the fund has outperformed the market, the S&P, or not. That's super important because there's this law of momentum in the market, something that keeps going up unless there's meaningful reason for that thing to go down, it can continue on its momentum. And so for something like ARK, year-to-date return hasn't been impressive, but in 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year history of the funds, it has always outperformed the market. So that's why it's outperforming the market from a historical point of view. And then the last thing on the famous 2x2 on the ETF cards is what you all love. Is it a undervalued or overvalued fund? And that's something you may not get anywhere else or in a lot of other platforms you use. And we pull the valuation, current valuation, and forecasted valuation of the holdings that the fund has, and then we bring the weighted average of those metrics. So weighted average price to book ratio, weighted average price to cash flow ratio, weighted average price to sales ratio, and so on. Of course, discount to premium net asset value or NAV. We bring all that together to give you a good sense of whether the fund in the ETF is currently overvalued or undervalued. And then we also do that for forecasted. So forecasted PE, forecasted price to book, forecasted price to cash flow ratio, and so on. So not only you could see current, but you also see forecast. And when I tell you ETF cards are much more powerful than the stock cards, that's why, because we've learned what are the stuff that you guys want to hear. And you've told us a lot about adding forecasted information to stock cards. So we started adding forecasted information to ETF cards, and soon we're going to do the same thing for stock cards. There's other information that matters to all of us when we're investing in ETF. We know about cost, we know about risk, we know about performance, we know about valuation. But what is the value? What is that ETF for? It's an important question because we always add an ETF to our portfolio or we invest in portfolio for specific reasons. Maybe we want to add some exposure. Maybe we're looking for dividends. Maybe there is a specific strategy we're going after for adding that ETF. We always ask internally in Stock Card, when Shama and I were doing research on ETF cards, we always ask ourselves, what is that ETF good for? What is it good for? And that's why we added to these two sections, dividend and exposure. Dividend, if you click on it, it tells you about is the fund, if ETF, a good dividend paying fund or not? Is it good for dividend? So if in the case of ARK, it's not, because there's no yield, there's no forward yield. And we also tell you whether it can afford buying the dividend, right? So one thing is that the fund has an ETF or not. The other one is whether it has the cash and the stability of cash to be able to afford. So RKK here in our example, it's not a dividend paying fund, but should they choose to pay a dividend, they can easily do. They have all the requirements. And if it was a dividend paying fund, then you would have seen whether it pays a dividend now and whether it can actually sustainably continue paying that dividend. The other one is the exposure section. Let me go back up. So here's a summary of it. RKK's exposure is good for communication services, healthcare, technology, non-US, mid-cap, and small cap. So again, it's in comparison to S&P. Of course, if you want to just get the buy the market, you go buy the S&P. So why would you deviate from not buy S&P and buy ARK? Because it would give you exposure to communication services, healthcare, technology, non-US, mid-cap, and small cap. And all that good stuff is available here in summary. You see, it gives you it's good for non-US exposure. It has 10.8%, which is higher than the exposure you would get to non-US stocks had you invested in S&P. So it's always in comparison to S&P. The other one is sector exposure. So we bring all the sectors. For example, ARKK, it's good for communication services compared to S&P, good for healthcare compared to S&P. It's not really good for industrial sector compared to S&P. It's lower indexed for industrial. Same for region and market cap. So this is been a very quick introduction to ARK. We also added something that I'm very excited, sort of the 52-week high and low range of that ETF. I know so many of you have been asking for 52-week high range for a high and low range for stock cards, and I'll promise, so we're gonna add it, but we started from ETF cards. So this is where you can get that range from, just beside the chart, that same range that you were asking for ETF cards. As usual, as before, you remember just before last week, we were giving you the top 25 holdings on ETFs. You can also get that here on top 25. You can get updates. So we refresh the data about all the ETFs and cards and all stock cards every night. And if anything changes about that fund or about our stocks comes to the update section, of course, you know, you have to follow it in order to get that notification in your inbox. So I just clicked on follow. You see following is changed. It's green. So I'll get notification any major information changes about ARK. And the last thing I want to tell you, which is I'm super excited, is all data section. So many of you, especially more advanced stock guardians, have been asking us, give me the raw, I like stock card, I like everything, but sometimes I just want to know one specific piece of information and it's all I want to know. And that's why we added all data section. So right at the bottom, when you scroll down, or if you use the left-hand navigation to click on all data, you can get all the raw information that we pull to populate an ETF card. So if you are interested in any of the information you are looking for, expense ratio maybe for ARK, you could just click it and we will just pull you that information you are interested in. So this is for those guys that or gals who look for specific information on ETF cards. Well, that's all I had to say. Of course, I can talk to you for a long time, but I've got to go and record the Daily Roll episode for today. We've got a good one for you lined up. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you use ETF cards. I hope you add it, follow it, and watch it. And I'll promise, soon, a secret between you guys and I, here in the tools, you have a screeners for stock, and in a few weeks, you're gonna have a screener for ETFs. And I am beyond excited for ETF screener because it's gonna make stock cards so much more powerful for all of you in the community. Thank you again for watching. Go check out your favorite ETF cards and let me know if you have any feedback in the comments or on the live chats, or send us an email at admin, ADMIN, admin@stockcard.io. Thanks to all of you fellow stock guardians. Bye for now.